While filming and digging into the history of the abandoned Mrs. C. M. Schwab High School building in Weatherly, PA, I learned a lot about the Schwabs, but Charles Schwab in particular. Charles Schwab is one of the most interesting people I've ever learned about putting these videos together. He lived a life of luxury that most of us could only dream of, but died a very poor man. He was one of the most important early figures in the development of Pennsylvania, and his business is still alive today. He built and owned some of the largest properties in history that are still in use, but one thing he owned that stood out to me the most for some reason was his private train car named the Loretto. But I never would have guessed that the original was rotting away in my hometown of Altoona, Pennsylvania. It was like puzzle pieces falling into my lap, begging me to put this together. The Loretto resides at the Altoona Memorial Railroaders Museum, amongst many other historic train cars that I'm going to show you. Unfortunately, a few years back, some kids broke into the Loretto and vandalized the priceless car while setting fire to it. The museum has plans to restore this amazing piece of Pennsylvania history soon, and I'm volunteering to help for free. Before we explore these magnificent cars though, let's recap some of the history on the Schwabs to learn just how important this man was to the development of our great state. Charles Michael Schwab, born February 18, 1862, was an American steel magnate. Under his leadership, Bethlehem Steel became the second largest steel maker in the United States and one of the most important heavy manufacturers in the world. Charles Schwab was born in Williamsburg, Pennsylvania, the son of Pauline and John Anthony Schwab. All four of his grandparents were Roman Catholic immigrants from Germany. Schwab was raised in Loretto, Pennsylvania, which he considered his hometown. Schwab began his career as an engineer in Andrew Carnegie Steel Works, starting as a stake driver in the engineering corps of Edgar Thomson Steel Works and Furnaces in Braddock, Pennsylvania. He was promoted often, including to the positions of General Superintendent of the Homestead Works in 1887. By the age of 35, he became president of Carnegie Steel Company. In 1901, he helped negotiate the secret sale of Carnegie Steel to a group of New York-based financiers led by J.P. Morgan. After the buyout, Schwab became the first president of the United States Steel Corporation, the company formed out of Carnegie's former holdings. After several clashes with Morgan and fellow U.S. Steel executive Albert Gary, Schwab left USS in 1903 to run the Bethlehem Shipbuilding and Steel Company in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. In 1908, Bethlehem Steel began making the beam, which revolutionized building construction and contributed to the age of the skyscraper. Schwab married Emmy Arana Dinky on May 1, 1883. Mrs. Schwab had lived in Weatherly, PA, and donated $85,000 to build a school there. Schwab eventually became very wealthy. He moved to New York City's Upper West Side, which at the time was considered the wrong side of Central Park, where he built Riverside, the most ambitious private house ever built in New York. Schwab also owned a 44-room summer estate on 1,000 acres in Loretto, Pennsylvania called Emergen, German for evergreen. The house featured opulent gardens and a 9-hole golf course. Rather than raise the existing house, Schwab had the mansion moved 200 feet on rollers to a new location to make room for the new mansion. Schwab became notorious for his fast-lane lifestyle, including opulent parties, high-stakes gambling, and a string of extramarital affairs producing at least one child out of wedlock. The affairs and the out-of-wedlock child soured his relationship with his wife. He became an international celebrity when he broke the bank at Monte Carlo and traveled in a $100,000 private rail car named Loretto. Even before the Great Depression, he had already spent most of his fortune, estimated at between $25 million to $40 million. Adjusted for inflation in the first decade of the 21st century, that equates to between $500 million and $800 million. The stock market crash of 1929 finished off what years of wanton spending had started. He spent his last years in a small apartment. He could no longer afford the taxes on Riverside, and it was seized by creditors. He had offered to sell the mansion at a huge loss, but there were no buyers. At his death, 10 years later, Schwab's holdings in Bethlehem Steel were virtually worthless, and he was over $300,000 in debt. Because of this horrific act of childish nonsense, I could not board the old train, but was able to film most angles through the windows, thankfully. The museum has plans to restore this amazing piece of Pennsylvania history. Thank you for exploring some old train cars and and looking deep into the past of the Loretto and Charles M. Schwab with me.
Check it out, man. I mean, this merch is like really sick. Check me out, bro.